My name is Robert Whitman. I'm 70 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the guy who fixes things. A broken machine, a leaky roof, even a family argument of always stepped in with a quiet word and a steady hand. I never, ever imagined I'd find myself at a Christmas dinner where the main event was a sentence that shattered my entire world. "You're no longer our family." Those words hit me like a shard of ice, colder than any December wind. They triggered a chain reaction that blew away all the holiday cheer, exposed years of buried grudges, and forced me to look back on a life I thought was honest and whole. But wait until you hear why. My son said those words. It's nothing like you'd expect. We'd planned that dinner for weeks. The table was laden with ham, glazed in brown sugar, my daughter-in-law's famous green bean casserole, and my own special mashed potatoes. The Christmas tree was still twinkling, casting a warm glow over the room. On the surface, it was perfect. Jokes were exchanged, small talk flowed, but underneath it all, our family was a pressure cooker. There was a half-finished reconciliation with my eldest son, the quiet wounds from his divorce, and conversations about money that I'd always tried to sidestep. That sentence didn't come out of nowhere. It was the eruption of years of resentment, misunderstandings, and secrets that had been slowly building up. And the real reason wasn't about money. It was something much more personal. Now, I want to be honest with you, and that means starting with my own mistakes. I'm no saint. I raised my kids with the same old-fashioned rules I grew up with. Work hard, hold your tongue, and never show your emotions. I truly believed that toughness was the same as love. Looking back, I see that my silence often came across as judgment. I missed graduations because I was at work. I stayed late at the office, thinking a weekend trip to the lake would make up for all the evenings I wasn't home. Over time, those small absences hardened into a belief from my children that I chose my work over them. But in my own mind, everything I did was a sacrifice asterisk. For asterisk them. That contradiction, their pain, and my intentions, that's the fault line that cracked wide open that night. He admits he made mistakes, but what he does next will shock you. There are details from that night that are burned into my memory. The way my son, David, who's 42, folded his napkin with such deliberate, chilling calm. The tremor in my daughter-in-law's hand as she passed the gravy. My granddaughter's laughter, completely oblivious to the tension in the room. David's eyes met mine when he said it. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't arguing. It was a dead, clinical statement. You're no longer our family. The delivery was so precise. It felt like he had rehearsed it, like a judge delivering a final verdict. That single moment forced me to take inventory of our entire history together. Childhood memories, inside jokes, fights over my will, the time I refused to lend him money for a business idea, the time he promised to call and never did. Every memory was like a coin I'd been collecting in a jar for decades, and in that instant, he just tipped the whole jar over, spilling everything onto the floor. He's calm, deliberate. But why? The answer will flip everything you think you know. If you're thinking this is just another story about money or inheritance, you're only half right. We all watch those TV dramas about family betrayals over a will and expect a neat, tidy motive. The truth is always messier. It was a mix of financial stress, pride, a long list of perceived slights, and a generation gap that technology and culture had widened into a canyon. And crucially, there was a secret I had carried for years, convinced that keeping it was the only way to protect them. I truly believed my silence spared them pain, but David saw it differently. To him, it wasn't protection. It was betrayal. In his world, honesty, even messy, painful honesty, was better than living in a carefully constructed peace. A secret he thought would protect his family actually pushed them away. And you'll want to know what it was. I'm 70 years old. The world has changed so much around me. Values, ideas about what it means to be a man, what a family should be. I come from a time when forgiveness was a firm handshake and moving on. Now, it seems to demand a full confession, raw vulnerability, and some kind of public reckoning. That generational mismatch created a language barrier between us. I thought my silence was a sign of dignity. They saw it as a sign of shame. On that Christmas night, our languages finally failed us completely. And when they did, a decision I'd kept buried deep inside me began to surface. I would not respond with anger, nor with a shame-faced apology. I would give them a reply that would recalibrate everything. I had rehearsed so many different responses on lonely walks and during sleepless nights, but none of them felt right. Then, something unexpected came to me, from a place I thought I had buried long ago. He had rehearsed his answers, but his real reply came from somewhere much deeper. You won't see it coming. This story isn't about winning or losing an argument. It's about leverage, truth, and the true shape of consequences. It is about how a man who believed he had given his family everything discovers he might have been using the wrong currency all along. By the time dessert was served, I had already decided two things. I would not beg for their forgiveness, and I would not let bitterness define my final years. But I also decided that I would not let their accusations stand unchallenged. I resolved to answer them in a way that was precise, measured, and yes, designed to make them feel the true weight of their declaration. Not to hurt them, but to reclaim the dignity I believed was rightfully ours. He's not out for blood. His plan is much smarter and much colder. Ready for his next move. So, here's where I start telling you the whole truth of how we got to that Christmas table, and why I chose a reply that neither my son nor I could have ever expected. A response that would become the hinge on which our entire family's future would turn. If you have ever felt dismissed by the people you love most, or watched silence build a wall so high you can't climb it, then listen closely. This isn't a tale of random cruelty. It's a map of how small decisions accumulate over a lifetime, and how a single Wilchoson sentence can topple an entire life's architecture. I'm going to lay out the backstory, the tensions, and the slow-burning calculations that led me to my final answer. You won't want to miss what happens next. They say I'm a distant man. But I wasn't always. There was a time when this house echoed with laughter, when my son David would climb onto my shoulders to place the star on our Christmas tree. My wife, Margaret, her humming would mix with the smell of cinnamon rolls, filling every corner of our home. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. But somewhere between raising children and chasing a steady paycheck, I traded that warmth for responsibility. I thought I was building them a fortress of security. They saw me building walls. I spent nearly 40 years at a manufacturing plant in Detroit. The noise, the heat, that became my comfort zone. Promotions, overtime, retirement plans, those were my trophies. When the company downsized, I took the buyout. I thought I'd finally earned my peace. What I didn't realize was that my entire sense of purpose was tied to being needed. And when my family started needing me less, I mistook their independence for rejection. That's when the real distance set in, a quiet estrangement, disguised as politeness. My job was gone, and with it, the part of myself my family had loved most. Davy, he was always different. Sensitive, idealistic. He saw the world in vibrant colors. I saw it in black and white checklists. He became a social worker, driven to fix broken systems. I respected his heart, but I doubted his practicality. That difference became the first silent argument between us. He believed I looked down on him. The truth, I envied him. He had something I'd buried long ago. The courage to truly feel. Jealousy isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides behind a shield of pride. Then the floor fell out from under me. Margaret, my wife of 45 years, was gone. Heart failure, it was swift, cruel, and left a void where my sanity used to be. David and I grieved in completely different languages. He cried and wanted to talk. I repaired the back deck and mowed the lawn in absolute silence. He called it escaping. I called it coping. We stopped speaking for months. When we finally tried, every conversation felt like we were just translating our pain into blame. Grief doesn't just take the person you love. It warps the way you love everyone else left behind. 2 years after Margaret passed, David married Lisa. She was kind, intelligent, but with me, she was always distant. Too polite, too formal. I felt like a guest in my own family, not a father. I can't blame her. I was never an easy man to read. She once told me, so gently, Robert, you build fences even when no one's attacking you. I just laughed it off, but her words stung with truth. She saw me more clearly than my own son did. Sometimes, it's an outsider who sees the truth your own family is too close to notice. After their wedding, the visits became less frequent. The phone calls got shorter. My granddaughter, Emma, was growing up through photos on a screen. Her birthdays were marked by store-bought cards instead of the handmade ones we used to make. I'd stare at her pictures and wonder if she even remembered the stories I used to tell her. Then came that Thanksgiving. David, with a careful, measured tone, suggested I think about downsizing. The words were kind, but the meaning was sharp as a razor. Dad, you're old. You don't need this house anymore. That one word, downsizing, ignited a war he never saw coming. Behind my calm smile, I started paying attention. I listened to the tone of their conversations, noticed the small, overlooked details. I saw how Lisa would deftly change the subject whenever finances came up. I noticed how David would avoid any talk about my will. They thought I was getting forgetful, that my mind was fading. What they didn't know was that I was sharper than ever. Just quieter. I began to suspect their distance wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. Something was happening behind my back. They thought he was getting old, but he was already 10 steps ahead. So I did what I'd done my entire life when something felt wrong. I investigated. I went through old legal documents, updated my passwords, and reviewed every financial statement. What I discovered wasn't illegal, but it was a deep, cutting disappointment. David had already contacted my attorney about my future arrangements. Without my knowledge, without my consent, he was planning my estate as if I were already gone. He wasn't dead yet, but his son was already dividing the inheritance. I didn't confront him. Not right away. Instead, I decided to wait, to let the full picture come into focus. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't need anger. It needs patience. My father once told me, a wise man doesn't shout when he's wronged. He sharpens his silence. That advice became my compass. I started playing the part they'd cast for me. The aging, forgetful father. I'd nod along as they discussed what's best for me. I let them believe I was slipping away, all while I was quietly preparing something they would never, ever expect. He pretended to be weak, but every smile was part of the plan. That year, I started writing letters, not the kind you send in the mail, but the kind people find when it's too late. Letters that explained my choices, confessed my regrets, and laid out my final instructions. I placed them all in a simple wooden box, and on the lid, I wrote, "To be opened after Christmas." Each letter was a single thread in the intricate web I was weaving. I didn't want to cause destruction. I wanted revelation. They needed to finally see the man they had so profoundly misjudged. My revenge wouldn't come from a place of rage. It would come from the undeniable, unfiltered truth. The next Christmas rolled around, and by then, everything was in place. The legal papers, the updated will, the letters, and one final, life-altering surprise. I invited everyone over for one last holiday dinner together. They probably thought it was just a bout of old man nostalgia. What they didn't know was that this wasn't a family gathering. It was the opening move in a game they hadn't even realized they were playing. I wasn't planning a holiday meal. I was planning a reckoning. The Christmas arrived with an uneasy stillness. A fresh layer of snow covered the driveway, muffling every sound in a blanket of white silence. Inside, I polished the silverware, reheated the ham, and arranged the dining table with the precision of a man hosting history, not just family. At each place setting, a small card bore a name. David, Lisa, Emma, Jonathan. It was as if writing their names could somehow make the fractured connections feel real again. I was wearing Margaret's favorite red sweater, the one she'd knitted for me years ago, before her heart finally gave out. It was my quiet tribute to her, and in a way, it was my armor for the night ahead. I wasn't just setting a table. I was setting a trap wrapped in tinsel. They arrived fashionably late, just like they always did. David wore a polite, strained smile, and Lisa held up a bottle of wine like a peace offering. My granddaughter, Emma, ran straight into my arms. God, that child's innocence still melts me. But behind their cheerful greetings, the air was thick with tension, like the heavy quiet before a thunderstorm. I could feel their eyes scanning the house, the antique furniture, the framed photographs, the life they assumed they would soon inherit. They didn't know the man they saw as fading away had already rewritten the ending to their story. Dinner started pleasantly enough. There was laughter, small talk, and even a few light-hearted jokes about politics that didn't sting too much. I watched them carefully, noticing the subtle things. The way David corrected Emma for speaking out of turn. The way Lisa glanced at her watch when the conversation drifted away from them. I waited for the moment. I knew it would come, because people who plot behind your back eventually can't resist unveiling their brilliant news. I could feel it coming, like the rumble of thunder just before a lightning strike. Halfway through the main course, David cleared his throat, that old signal he'd used since childhood when he wanted everyone's attention. He raised his wine glass and began, "Dad, I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for hosting us again this year. You've always been resilient." The word resilient felt so rehearsed, so sanitized. Then came the real reason for his toast. But I think it's time we had an honest conversation about the future. Let me tell you, whenever someone says they want an honest conversation, truth is rarely what follows. Control is. I leaned back in my chair, playing the part of the patient old man they all thought I was. David continued, "You've done so much for us, but you're 70 now, and Lisa and I think it's time you considered assisted living, or maybe selling the house. It's just too much for you to handle. Dad, we want what's best for you." His tone was so warm and caring, but his words dripped with the finality of an eviction notice. Lisa nodded in agreement, her eyes soft but completely empty. He said, "We want what's best," but what he really meant was, "We want what's yours." The room went quiet. The only sound was the gentle tapping of Emma's fork against her plate. I managed a small, gentle smile and asked, "Is this your idea, David? Or your wife's?" My voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. David stiffened. "It's both of ours." "Dad, you've isolated yourself since Mom died. We're just trying to help." I nodded again, slowly. "So, I am a problem to be solved now." He sighed, frustrated. "No, Dad, you're no longer part of how we want to live. We need to move forward." And then came the blade, sharp and cold. "You're no longer our family." That single sentence sliced through 40 years of fatherhood in a single breath. For a few seconds, no one moved. It felt like even the Christmas lights dimmed in the sudden silence. Lisa looked down at her lap. Emma just stared, her young face filled with confusion. I took a deep breath, and I felt something cold and steady rise inside me. It wasn't sadness, it was clarity. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. They thought they were taking control of the story, but I was the one who had written the ending months ago. They thought they had buried me emotionally, but I had already dug their graves of regret. I placed my napkin on the table and smiled not bitterly, but with the kind of calm serenity that deeply unsettles people who are expecting rage. "David," I said softly, "do you know why I really wanted you all here tonight?" He frowned. "To have dinner, I suppose." I slowly shook my head. "No. I wanted to make sure the people I love most hear my truth, while I'm still alive to speak it." The calmest voice at the table had just become the most dangerous one. I stood up slowly, my old knees creaking but my voice strong and clear. "You talk about the future like I'm already gone. You think I don't see your emails to my lawyer, or the calls you make to my bank pretending to be concerned family managers. But I do. I see everything. And tonight, you'll finally see something too." I reached under the table and placed a small, polished wooden box in front of me. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes, my letters. This box wasn't a gift. It was a revelation. Lisa's eyes widened. David looked utterly confused. "What is this?" he asked, his voice strained. I smiled. "Every word you just said about me being old and confused. I wrote it down. Every secret conversation you tried to have without me. Primera record. It Italiano. Every assumption, every hidden insult, every single plan to reallocate my home. It's all right here. Signed, sealed, and time-stamped. I wasn't losing my memory. I was keeping theirs on record. David's face turned pale. "Dad, this isn't necessary," he stammered. But I was just getting started. This was their story, told in their own words, and I was about to read it back to them. The night after Christmas was the quietest night of my life. The house felt bigger, not because they were gone, but because the air had finally cleared of pretense. For 70 years, I'd been the man who filled silence with apologies and explanations. That night, I didn't. I just sat by the fire with a cup of coffee, feeling both hollow and free. The echoes of "You're no longer our family" replayed in my head. But this time it didn't sting. It sounded like freedom disguised as cruelty. Sometimes, the words that break you are the very same ones that set you free. The next morning, I found the dinner table still set. The glasses half full, the chairs pulled out unevenly, the napkins wrinkled like the remnants of a battle. I didn't clean up right away. I wanted the scene to stay exactly as it was, a frozen monument to a war I had finally fought and won. It wasn't grief that kept me there. It was a profound sense of understanding. You can't lose what already left you emotionally years ago. He wasn't mourning what he lost. He was finally seeing what had already died. David didn't call. Neither did Lisa. But the silence didn't ache the way it used to. Instead, it whispered possibilities. I had already mailed out the documents notarized, sealed, and registered under Margaret's foundation. This house would remain mine until my death. But after that, it would become a learning center for underprivileged students. My late wife Margaret used to dream about helping children find their place in the world. No, that dream had a heartbeat again, and I could almost hear her voice in the quiet, thanking me. He didn't just destroy their greed, he revived her dream. 3 days later, an email arrived, not from David, but from Lisa. "Robert, I understand why you did what you did. David's hurt, but he won't admit he was wrong. I'm sorry for my part. Please, don't shut us out completely." I read it twice. Lisa was clever. Her message wasn't about true reconciliation. It was about testing my resolve. She wanted to see if the old man who always gave second, third, and fourth chances still lived inside me. He didn't. She reached out for forgiveness, but he'd already buried that version of himself. Instead of replying, I printed the email and added it to a folder. I called it Evidence of Awakening. I wasn't documenting revenge anymore. I was documenting my own evil. I wanted to leave behind a record of how power shifts when silence finally learns to speak. I was no longer the man who begged to be understood. I had become the man who defined what understanding meant. His revenge was no longer punishment, it was transformation. A week later, my phone rang. It was my granddaughter, Emma. "Grandpa," she said softly, "Daddy's really sad. He says, you hate him." My heart tightened. "No, sweetheart," I told her. "I don't hate him, but sometimes people need to lose something valuable to understand its worth." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Like when I lost my teddy bear and cried until I found it." "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, "just like that." Children always see the simple truths adults are too proud to admit. That conversation replayed in my head for days. It made me realize my revenge had already done its job. Not by hurting David, but by making him finally face himself. I'd given him the mirror he'd avoided for years. Now, it was up to him whether he looked into it or turned away. Revenge without reflection is just cruelty. Mine was an invitation to wake up. The best revenge isn't destruction, it's realization. I cut him off. "Oh, but it is, because tonight, I'm not your burden. I'm your mirror." The table went dead silent. Even the fireplace crackled less. "You said I'm no longer family. Fine. Then you're no longer heirs." I opened the last envelope and slid a legal document across the table, the new will. The old man's revenge wasn't about anger. It was about paperwork. I'd transferred all my assets to the house, my savings, the stocks to a scholarship fund in my late wife Margaret's name. Every penny would go to children who had no family, no home, no safety net. I looked David straight in the eyes. You wanted to move forward without me? Now you can without anything of mine to weigh you down. He didn't just disown them. He rewrote his entire legacy. David stood up, his body shaking with disbelief. You can't do this. I already did. Premeta. Saeed calmly in the best part. It's legally airtight. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. You see, David, you taught me something important tonight. Sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty, and you've made your choice. He just turned their betrayal into a lesson they would never, ever forget. For the first time in years, I felt a deep, profound peace. Not triumph, but peace. The kind that comes when you stop begging others to understand you and start standing firmly on your own truth. David's mouth opened, then closed. He had no words left. Lisa looked like she wanted to apologize, but her guilt silenced her. I picked up my wine glass, toasted the empty air, and said, "To family, ... Whatever that word still means. It was the toast that ended it all, but also began something far more powerful. Then, a small voice broke the tension. Emma, bless her heart, whispered, "Grandpa, does that mean we can't come here anymore?" I knelt beside her, my heart aching for her innocence. "You can always come here, sweetheart," I said softly. "You're the only one who never lied to me." She gave me a faint smile. I hugged her tightly, knowing she'd understand it all when she was older. Even in an act of revenge, he saved one innocent soul, the only bridge left unburned. The story doesn't end with a fallout at the dinner table. What followed was a quiet storm that rippled through their lives, the community, and even the media. The true aftermath, the public reaction, and how this one old man's calm vengeance became a legend. That's where the real story begins. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the Foundation's board. They had decided to feature Margaret's story in their annual gala, honoring her as a posthumous founder. They asked if I would speak. I hesitated at first. I wasn't sure my voice could hold steady in front of strangers. But then I realized this was how I'd reclaim my narrative. For years, my family saw me as outdated. Now, a room full of strangers would hear how love, loss, and betrayal built something timeless. The man his son dismissed as irrelevant was about to stand center stage. The night of the gala, I wore my old Navy suit, the one I hadn't worn since Margaret's funeral. As I stepped onto the stage, I looked out at the faces young students, teachers, donors, people who believed in second chances. My hands trembled at first, but when I began to speak, the tremor vanished. "I was told once that I was no longer family," I said. "But tonight, I see family everywhere, not in blood, but in belief. My wife used to say that kindness is the only inheritance that grows when you give it away. I think she was right." He turned rejection into redemption, and everyone in that room felt it. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, it was gentle, real. I realized I didn't need my son-ness validation anymore. I had found something bigger, a legacy without dependency. That's when it hit. Mitha, true power of revenge isn't in proving someone wrong. It's in proving that their cruelty can't define your peace. He didn't win by fighting back. He won by rising above. After the event, a journalist approached me. She'd been moved by my speech and wanted to write an article about the Foundation's origin. "Your story could inspire millions," she said. I smiled. "Just make sure it's not about bitterness. It's about awakening." The article was published the next week. The father who lost his family but found his purpose. It went viral. The men they erased from their lives became the story America couldn't stop sharing. Suddenly, my inbox flooded with messages from strangers thanking me for helping them forgive their own families. From parents estranged from their children. From people who'd lost everything but still believed in rebuilding. My story had left my living room and entered theirs. David must have seen it. I know because the silence from his end became heavier, more thoughtful. The internet became his stage, and his son was forced to watch from the audience. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my door. No return address. Inside, in David's handwriting, were just 4 words. I finally understand, Dad. No apology, no plea, just recognition. I stared at it for a long time before smiling. Sometimes, that's all the closer you need. He didn't need "I'm sorry." He needed "I understand" and "I got Italiano." That night, I walked outside and looked at the sky, the same cold December stars from that Christmas dinner. Only this time, I wasn't the abandoned father. I was the architect of my peace. Revenge, I realized, had never been about punishment. It had been about reclaiming control over my own story and writing the ending on my terms. His silence had spoken louder than any scream ever could. When the letter came, I finally understand. Dad, most people would have melted, but I didn't. Understanding isn't the same as remorse, and remorse isn't the same as change. I'd lived long enough to know that guilt fades fast when comfort returns, so I folded the letter neatly, placed it in my desk drawer, and decided to see if David's understanding could survive discomfort. He wasn't ready to forgive. He was ready to test the truth behind those words. The media buzz around the foundation hadn't died down. Donations poured in. Interviews stacked up, and I quietly redirected every bit of attention toward Margaret's scholarship. For every story they wrote about me, I made sure her name was printed first. I wanted the world to remember her compassion, not their betrayal. But the irony was sweet. The more her name appeared, the more people associated it with mine. His revenge didn't need their names dragged through the mud. Their absence from glory hurt more. A few weeks later, I received a polite email from David's firm. "Mr. Whitman, congratulations on the success of your wife's foundation. We'd be honored to have you speak at our annual leadership event on legacy and integrity." I laughed out loud. His firm, the same one he'd bragged about for years, wanted me to speak. The irony was delicious. I replied, I'd be honored. The hunter had just walked into the trap, and Robert was already baiting it. The event was high profile, held in a glass building downtown. David didn't know I'd accepted yet. When he finally saw my name on the speaker list, I could almost imagine the look on his face, the slow, sinking realization that his father, the man he'd written off as irrelevant, was now the face of integrity his company wanted to showcase. He wasn't just attending his son's world. He was owning the stage inside it. When the night came, the hall glowed with luxury champagne, suits, and polite smiles. I arrived alone, steady, collected. I watched David across the room, trying to decide whether to approach me or pretend I wasn't there. He chose the latter cowardice, dressed as professionalism. That was fine. I preferred a silent audience for what was coming. He didn't need confrontation. The stage would deliver it for him. As I took the podium, I began calmly. "Thank you for inviting me. Tonight, I want to talk about what integrity really means." The audience leaned in. I could feel David's tension like static electricity. "Integrity," I continued, "isn't proven by success or kindness when eyes are watching. It's measured by what we do when loyalty costs us something." David's eyes widened. He knew exactly who I was talking about. Every word was polite on the surface, but each syllable cut like glass. I stood on that stage, lights in my eyes, and told them a story. It was a simple story, really, about a man who once tried to manage his father's future before the father was even gone. I spoke about how the old man didn't retaliate with anger, but with something far more powerful, clarity. He didn't take revenge, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. He simply rearranged the truth until it revealed everyone's reflection. The audience applauded. They saw it as a metaphor, an inspirational anecdote about wisdom and grace. But my son, David, standing in the back of the room, he knew it wasn't a metaphor. The audience heard inspiration. He heard a confession. After the speech, it was a whirlwind. People crowded around me for handshakes and photos. Reporters pushed forward with questions, and executives offered generous donations to the foundation. Through it all, I saw David. He was just standing there, frozen in the distance, trapped somewhere between pride and humiliation. He couldn't say a word. He couldn't react publicly without confirming that the cautionary tale was his own. And that, right there, is the thing about smart revenge. It leaves your enemy with only two choices: silence or self-exposure. I didn't need to destroy my son's image. I just made him live inside the one he'd created for himself. Later that night, as the last of the guests began to leave, David finally approached me. The room was quiet now, the applause a distant echo. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You used me." I looked at him calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "No, son. I included you. You wanted control, remember? Well, now you're part of a lesson people will remember long after we're gone." His jaw tightened. "You made me look like a villain." I gently shook my head. "No, David. You did that yourself. I just gave your actions a spotlight." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The truth did all the damage for him. He tried to speak again, opened his mouth, but then stopped. What was there left to argue? The truth was simple, complete, and irreversible. I patted his shoulder, the same gesture I'd used when he was a boy learning to ride his bike. But this time, it wasn't for comfort. It was closure. "You told me I wasn't family anymore," I said softly, the words hanging in the air between us. "I believed you. So I stopped acting like one." Then I turned and walked away, leaving him to stand alone in the echo of his own words. The last thing he ever took from his son was the power of the final word. Driving home that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won. I just felt balanced. People often mistake revenge for chaos, for fire and fury. But real revenge isn't about destruction. It's about restoring symmetry. The man who once tried to erase me from his life now had to watch me redefine him, publicly and elegantly. I hadn't shouted, threatened, or cursed. I'd simply turned his own arrogance into my evidence. He didn't just burn our bridges. I made him walk across them barefoot. In the weeks that followed, the company released the video of my speech. It went viral again. Online, the comments flooded in, praising my wisdom, quoting my lines about loyalty and dignity. A few people even tagged David in the posts, unknowingly connecting the dots for the world to see. He stayed silent. What else could he do? He had no way to deny the truth without confirming it was his. The internet crowned me a hero and left him speechless. And the best part, the foundation received record-breaking donations. With that money, I directed a new scholarship, specifically for children estranged from their parents, and Primera Na Medit, the Second Chance Grant. When reporters asked if my family story inspired it, I just smiled and said, "No comment." His silence spoke louder than any confession ever could. David eventually stopped trying to reach out. His wife, Lisa, sent me a single message. "You've made your point, Robert." He's humbled. "Maybe that's what you wanted." I didn't reply. It wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about legacy. I had ensured my late wife Margaret's memory would live on, and I'd taught my son that betrayal costs far more than any inheritance could ever pay. I didn't just take away their wealth. I made wisdom the only thing they could inherit. Sometimes, late at night, I replay that speech in my head. I can still see the look on David's face, that exact moment when the power shifted permanently. It's not joy I feel when I remember it. It's relief. The balance was restored. The lesson was delivered. The circle was complete. Revenge wasn't a flame anymore. It was closure, forged in silence. But victory has a strange sound, and sometimes it's the silence that screams the loudest. The first night after the gala, I slept better than I had in months. The second night, I didn't sleep at all. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that amplifies every little thought. The ticking clock. The hum of the refrigerator. They all sounded like reminders of what I traded to stand alone on that moral high ground. 4 weeks. Letters and emails poured in. People called me an inspiration. TV hosts wanted interviews. The world loves a redemption story. They didn't seem to care that mine was built on someone else's pain. But here's the thing they don't tell you. Admiration isn't companionship. Applause fades much faster than forgiveness. Once the cameras turned away, I was left with what revenge never warns you about. Emptiness, disguised as achievement. I had become a hero to strangers, and a ghost to my own blood. Every morning, I still brewed 2 cups of coffee out of habit. One for me, and one for the absence that still wore Margaret's name. Her picture on the mantel seemed to smile differently now. Proud, maybe, but not peaceful. You'd tell me I went too far. I whispered to her one morning, tracing her face through the glass. But you'd also say he needed to learn, even from beyond. She was the only one whose voice could still question me. The foundation thrived. The press adored my composer, but every public compliment felt like a private wound reopening. I'd spent my life building bridges, and now my revenge had turned them all into mirrors. All I could see was myself, reflected in every single success. I had finally reached the top of the mountain, but the air was too thin to breathe. Then, another email from Lisa arrived. Dad, David is different now. He's quieter. He's drinking less. Maybe it's time. Maybe it was. Maybe the lesson wasn't just for him. Maybe it was for me, too. I had taught him the price of betrayal. But what had I learned? That a perfectly balanced world can be a terribly lonely one. The final word is powerful, but it's a conversation that brings warmth. Revenge gave me closure, but it was forgiveness that offered a new beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that was a lesson worth learning, too. He didn't reply right away. The cursor blinked on the empty screen. A digital heartbeat he couldn't commit to. He'd told himself this silence was his weapon, a part of the punishment. But who was it really punishing anymore? Revenge had done its job, and now it was demanding rent to stay in his soul. One Sunday, he walked to the park where he used to take David fishing. The lake still shimmered, as if it remembered them a father and a son, laughing over tangled lines and clumsy casts. He sat there for hours, a solitary figure watching other families pass by. Some argued, some laughed. All of them were imperfect, but they were together. He was starting to understand the cruel punchline of his victory. The worst part of revenge isn't the loneliness. It's the chilling realization that the world moved on while you were busy winning a war no one else was fighting. That night, he pulled out David's first letter again, the one that began, "I finally understand, Dad." He read it slowly this time, searching for something beyond his own anger. There was sincerity there, flawed, maybe even selfish, but real. For the first time, he wondered if his punishing silence had turned a harsh lesson into a life sentence. Justice had been served, but maybe, just maybe, it had been overcooked, left on the heat for too long until it turned to ash. The following morning, he typed a short note. Understanding matters more when it becomes action. I'm listening if you're ready to speak. He didn't sign it, love. Dad. That felt like a lie. Just R. Whitman. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It was a door, once bolted shut, now left slightly ajar. Maybe that was enough for now. The same hand that had meticulously built walls of resentment finally turned a doorknob. Days passed in a familiar, heavy silence. Then, a reply. A simple line that landed with the weight of a decade. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll come see you if you still want that. He stared at the message for a long time. A part of him, the part that had learned to survive without warmth, recoiled. It wanted to stay in the cold, familiar fortress he had built. But another part, older and quieter, whispered that revenge had done its duty. It had ended a chapter. It was time for something else entirely. Revenge may end the story, but he was beginning to see that only forgiveness can change its genre. When David finally arrived, there were no grand speeches, no dramatic embraces. Whose two men, both older than they wanted to be, standing in the same house that held every echo of their mistakes. Robert poured coffee, this time for 2A took a sip. For the first time in years, it didn't taste like bitterness. It just tasted like coffee. The same table that had witnessed a profound betrayal now hosted its potential cure. The air between them was thick, not with anger, but with everything that had gone unsaid for so long. David stood at the doorway like a guest in his own memory, hesitant to cross the threshold. Robert didn't rush him. Revenge had taught him patience. Forgiveness, he was learning, would test it in a whole new way. He simply motioned toward the old armchair across from him. You remember where it is? Sometimes the hardest part of coming home isn't finding your way back. It's realizing the furniture hasn't moved, but you have. David sat down slowly, the worn leather groaning under his weight. His voice cracked on the first words. I didn't come for apologies, Dad. I came for understanding. Robert nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. Then we're finally in the same business. For the first time in years, they shared a quiet laugh. It was brittle, fragile, but real. Healing doesn't always begin with a hug. Sometimes it starts with a sentence that doesn't demand one. They talked for hours. About the foundation, about Margaret, and about the night. Everything cracked open. David didn't make excuses. He didn't try to justify his actions. Admitted AD tried to control the future out of fear of losing his inheritance. Fear of fading into the shadow of his father's legacy. You made me feel small, he confessed, his gaze fixed on the floor. Robert looked at him, not with judgment, but with a new, gentler clarity. I didn't make you feel small, son. He sighed softly. I just stopped pretending you were tall. Brutal honesty, delivered with kindness, can rebuild more truth than time ever will. By the third cup of coffee, something inside Robert shifted. He saw not the arrogant, betraying son, but the frightened boy who'd once built tree houses too close to the edge, always reaching for something just beyond his grasp. Maybe that was the thing about revenge once. The fire burns out. All that's left is the original wound, exposed and waiting to be cleaned. RevengeX, it burns the wound shut. Forgiveness heals. The difference is whether you can stand the pain of either. Eventually, David asked about the foundation. It's everywhere now, he said, a note of distant pride in his voice. Mom would have loved that. She would, Robert replied, and she would very love that you finally said her name without guilt in your eyes. David managed a faint smile. You really did it for her, didn't you? Robert nodded. For her, and for me. I needed the world to know love doesn't die just because people do. He realized then that the greatest revenge against grief is legacy. As the day faded into a soft evening light, they walked outside together. The garden still held traces of Margaret's touch rosebush, uneven and a little wild, but stubbornly blooming year after year. David reached out and touched one of the soft petals. You still keep them alive. Robert smiled. They bloom on their own now. I just keep them safe. And for the first time, he knew that sentence wasn't just about the flowers. Every metaphor of care eventually becomes literal when love is allowed to return. Before leaving, David turned back at the door. I don't expect things to be the same, Robert replied, looking his son in the eye. Neither do I. That's how we'll keep them better. They didn't shake hands or embrace. They simply stood in the doorway, two silhouettes framed by years of silence, now turning into something that almost resembled peace. Closure doesn't slam doors shut. It lets light through the cracks. That night, Robert returned to his desk. The same drawer still held the first letter David had written. He unfolded it once more, then placed it beside the new one, the one that said, I'll come see you. 2 letters, 2 lifetimes, one built on pain, the other on possibility. Forgiveness, he finally realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about annotating it with truth, adding new chapters, and understanding the old ones differently. When he lay down to sleep, the house no longer felt haunted. The quiet was no longer accusing. It was resting. Margaret's picture on the nightstand seemed to soften under the moonlight. He whispered into the stillness, We're okay now. And for the first time in a long, long time, he believed it. Have you ever wondered what happens after revenge? Is it peace? Is it emptiness? For Robert, months passed after his public takedown of the son who betrayed him. The world kept moving, but for him, time had changed. It no longer rushed or dragged. It simply flowed. He started finding small joys again, the clink of his spoon against the coffee cup, the familiar creak of his porch chair, the sun cutting through the blinds like golden forgiveness. He realized the loudest sound in healing is the one you don't notice anymore. The silence where the anger used to be. Letters began to arrive. Strangers who had seen his speech on TV. Parents who had reconnected with their estranged children. Sons who finally apologized, even if it was too late. Robert read each one, not with pride, but with a quiet gratitude. His story, born from pain, had traveled farther than his anger ever could. It became a map for others trying to find their way out of the dark. One day, a university reached out. They wanted to honor him with an award for a humanitarian legacy. The irony made him smile. Years ago, he would have loved the applause. Now, he understood legacy wasn't built from fanfare. It was built from endurance. He decided to attend, not for himself, but for the message it sent. That mercy can make headlines. At the ceremony, his son, David, stood beside him. There were no stage lights separating them this time. No fear, just quiet pride. When they handed Robert the plaque, he kept his speech short. "We don't choose how people hurt us," he said, his voice steady. "But we do choose what grows from the wound." The room fell into a sacred silence, the kind that isn't empty but full of understanding. His revenge had ended the feud, but his wisdom was just beginning the legacy. Afterward, as cameras flashed, David leaned in. "You did it, Dad. You turned everything into something good." Robert chuckled softly. "No, son, we did. It just took us a few broken years to remember how." For the first time, David didn't flinch at the word we. The true victory wasn't reclaiming respect. It was restoring a language that included love. Back home that night, the house felt different. It was no longer a museum of frozen memories. Every photo seemed alive. He stopped by his late wife Margaret's picture and whispered, "It's done." A soft breeze blew through the open window, and for a fleeting moment, he felt her presence light, approving, eternal. He finally understood. Sometimes, forgiveness is just love, finding a new shape to live in. Weeks later, David joined the family foundation full-time. They didn't need to talk about the past. Every decision they made together, every handshake, every shared smile was an unspoken apology. Robert no longer needed to win. He was too busy rewriting what family meant. Revenge had just been the prologue. This was the real story. One afternoon, a journalist asked him, "If you could change anything about your past, would you?" Robert Poussaid then answered quietly, "No, because even my pain paid for someone else's peace." The reporter looked puzzled, but Robert didn't explain. Some lessons aren't meant for print. They just need to be witnessed. As the sun set, he sat on his porch, watching the world turn gold. He had outlived the bitterness and outgrown the need for victory. In the twilight of his years, Robert learned something profound. Revenge and forgiveness aren't opposites. They're neighbors living on the same street of truth. One teaches you what you'll never accept again. The other teaches you what's still worth saving. Life, he realized, wasn't about balancing the scales. It was about weight. What you carry, what you put down, and what you hand to the next generation, hoping they'll hold it more gently. His son's betrayal had once broken something sacred, but that crack had let in a kind of light he never expected. Self-respect wrapped in compassion. Looking at David now, he no longer saw the man who had disowned him. He saw the man who came back, not out of obligation, but out of recognition, the kind that says, "I finally see who you were, and who I became because of it." In his final journal entry, Robert wrote, "If pain taught me to fight, forgiveness taught me to rest. If anger taught me strength, love taught me endurance. The son who broke my heart became the reason I learned to use it again." He didn't know it would be his last entry, but it was fitting. Because every story, no matter how bitter, deserves to end with peace, if the heart is brave enough to find it. The man who once turned his pain into a weapon had finally turned it into a lesson, and that lesson was simple. You don't win when they hurt you. You win when it doesn't hurt you anymore. In the end, revenge fades, but forgiveness stays, and legacy, that quiet echo of who we were, becomes the only story that time refuses to erase. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content that explores the deeper side of life. See you next time.